So this week we're really excited to have Matt, Loader and Iain Monteith with us of Loader Monteith. Matt and Iain worked together for around about a decade before joining forces to create Loader Monteith in 2016. It's now a practice of around 6 in Glasgow, and they both critic at Glasgow School of Art. The practice is inspired by Scotland, its wild landscapes and vibrant cities, and has a focus on meaningful design and meticulous design, particularly seen in the work of High Sunderland by Peter Wormsley. The practice was also announced recently as conservation architect alongside David Chipperfield on the iconic Jenner's building in Edinburgh. I'll pass over to you, please.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much for having us. So we are Loader Monteith. I'm Matt Loader and this is Iain Monteith. We sort of thought before we come and talk to you, well, what would it have been useful if we were sitting where you are to talk a little bit about? And we kind of decided that we should probably tell you that I don't think either of us imagined running a practice at the point at which we were at university. So our routes to practice are quite different, and you'll maybe, as the night goes on, realise that Iain and I are actually quite different as well in a lot of respects. So I can talk first. I was at university in Edinburgh. I kind of followed a vaguely traditional route to practice in that I was a full-time student. I did my year out at Richard Murphy's. I went back to university at Edinburgh and did the second piece of degree. I then left university and moved to Elder and Cannon in Glasgow. From there, the credit crunch happened and I was retained, but at that point I was one of only 5 people. Chose to leave and joined a practice called Civic Design, at which point I became a parent, and for various personal reasons, it became the obvious thing for me to do to set up a practice so that we could have a family and for family life to work at the same time. And that dovetails into Iain, who can explain his rather different route to getting where we are.
Yeah, so as Matt said, he might be more of a typical route in terms of university and then on from there, but I actually left school at 17 and went straight into practice as an apprentice. And that is something that the IBA I know are pushing a bit more now as a route. And I studied part-time for 10 years, so through college and university. So it was first practice was college and university, went to Elder and Cannon, continued my diploma part-time. The MAC is, as far as I'm aware, the only school in Scotland that does the course part-time. Yeah, and we obviously met at Elder and Cannon. Finished my diploma, went to Page Park for 6 years. And then took the leap to join Matt and practice. And yeah, you'll see there's children and there, and yeah, have your children before you're 40. That was nice. So yeah, and now we're Loader Monteith.
So a couple of key projects for each of us. I think I did much of my growing up when I was at Elder and Cannon, and I was lucky enough to work with the Shettleston Housing Association offices, which won the Doolan Prize as the best building in Scotland. And then I went on and was the project architect on their housing project at Lauriston in Glasgow as well.
Yeah, and Wales to Page Park, I've worked on various typologies from housing to education and healthcare, primarily in 2 examples. The lower image is in St Mary's Medical Centre in Edinburgh, in the grounds of St Mary's Cathedral, which is a category listed cathedral. And the top image is Woodside Health Centre in Maryhill in Glasgow. So that was a big one. That was 7,000 square metres of healthcare. So that was the biggest project.
I think it's fair to say that we've had these slightly meandering routes to getting to where we are. Like, it wasn't ever predetermined, and it didn't feel like this deliberate thing, but it has happened. And as was said in the introduction, we've had this slightly amazing thing happen recently, which is that we were engaged as the conservation architect to work with David Chipperfield on this building, which is presently in for planning in Edinburgh. So this is the Jenner's building. It's A-listed, and there is a third fully qualified architect that works with Iain and I, also called Iain, which is of no end of confusion to me. Yeah, and qualified conservation architect. So it's in very large part down to his skill and prowess that we're working with David Chipperfield, which is pretty wonderful. Where do we work? All over Scotland and the UK. So from cities to the suburbs, to rural farms, to the middle of nowhere in the Highlands. We have projects down in London. We've been asked about projects in Cornwall. We have a project that's about to hopefully go on site in Manchester. So we really like working in a broad range, and the thing that tends to bind our work together is not so much what it is, but that it all tends to be difficult, is the kind of the common theme. So it tends to deal with listed buildings, conservation areas, or greenbelt land. And those are the things that tend to bind our projects together. It's not a typology or a location. It's actually that they have challenging contexts. But out of constraints come imagination. And we're 5 and a bit years what we thought we'd talk you through this evening. So sorry, these are some of the projects that we're not going to talk about tonight, but we thought we'd show them very briefly in passing. So we've broken the talk into 4 sections, and the first one is probably the standard fare for a lot of very young practices, which is really limited budgets, where you're not necessarily looking to add area to a project, but you're actually just looking to unlock its potential. So we have a couple of these. This is probably the first project that we had as a practice. It was really, really small. It was an architect referral service that the Royal Incorporation of Architects in Scotland set us up with. And we have this underlying principle on all our projects, which is that they will be as good as you can make them. So therefore, don't have any preconceptions about when you walk into a space, if it's poor. If you can engage with the clients, if you can start talking their language, you can do something incredible. So this is in a conservation area in Pollock Shields in Glasgow. And we had a set of clients that wanted to do something to this flat to make it special. And it had this single story projecting garden, which had a kitchen in it. And as you can see, it was incredibly ordinary. So it's a very big flat. It had 3 bedrooms, but it also had this sort of 1 extra room, and it had this slightly unusual circulation route to get into it. So the existing plan as it was is on the left-hand side there. So you can see that the front door's at the top of the page. You walk down, and to get to the kitchen, you had to walk into the hall, through a cupboard, through a dining room, through a kind of a back door ante area, and then into the kitchen. Photos. And what we proposed was that actually you should have line of sight of the garden when you walk in to the hall, and being able to see greenery will draw you through into the kitchen, and that the kitchen should sit centrally within the property. So what we proposed was that the kitchen was pulled back into the space, and that the garden room that was the kitchen should become a little sitting garden area. What that meant is that there's 2 living rooms. There's one which is a day room in the garden, and then when it gets cold, because you've got external walls and an external roof, you should retreat into the main living room for the evening. This had a really small budget, £25,000, something in that order, just to give you an idea. And that was a few years ago, and that wouldn't be achievable now for the records, especially after last year. So this was a little axonometric that we still hand draw a lot in the practice, because we think there's a looseness and a freedom to it that in computers sometimes you lose. And this sort of showed the ideas that we had. One of the things that we'll talk about quite a lot as we go through is this idea of having structure on show and it giving heart and soul to a property. And this was the first time that we did it, that we thought, well, up So what happens if we just take that ceiling away and put a roof light on it? And we'll just have to suck it and see. So this was our axonometric that described pulling that kitchen in, having a utility box, which is the black bit next to the back door, and then this garden room with a roof light above it. And then this is how it came. So this is the large window, and you can see the grey slatted wood. That's like the cheapest wood that you can buy in the supermarket. These are Howden's kitchen units with a piece of concrete that we had made. And then this is the ceiling once it was taken away. So it's a pretty dramatic transformation from that kitchen. And it's all reductive. We weren't adding anything. There was no additional area. It was just about reorganizing it. We should also say that the clients for this project in particular have unbelievable taste. So they were going around sourcing the floor from salvage yards, architectural salvage yards. And this is, again, a theme that runs through our work. And I'm sure it will run through your careers actually as well, is this idea of being gentle on the planet and not using new things if you don't buildings, reusing old materials, finding a way to be gentle on the planet. And so this is a case in point of that, and it was right at the start.
Just as well in terms of the scale of this project, I know your projects, there's probably museums and all sorts of things going on. You're thinking, why are they showing us a refurbishment of a kitchen? And that's perfectly reasonable. But in these projects, you really get to explore the essentials of the experience of being in a space. And that's what architecture is, if it's not a sequence of experiences. So, you know, things like that door and the window that you're looking out to, you know, that door didn't exist in that point, so you never had that chance to connect to that view beyond in that green space. And as we walk around the school, we can see the green spaces around us. But projects of this scale, and also when you go into practice, nobody's going to give you a museum to work on, right? Probably going to start on something, you know, maybe this scale, certainly on your own, you could, you know, I'll go with this. But it's important that you can really test your ideas in terms of light, views, connections, you know, where can you have a conversation, what's a material like, what's a texture like. And that's where these projects come into the room, you know, and it's important to get a client or working with clients that are happy for you to and want to explore those avenues with you. And that's really tying the romance in the client here, impeccable taste, and we're interested in those things. Yeah. And even just the space to create a moment like that window now becomes, it was a much larger window, and it's a place to sit and look into the garden, because there was no connection to the garden previously, and a lot of older properties don't have a connection to the garden, and, you know, it's just not a place that they thought about. And that leads us into a project that's developed on, you know, there's a lot of themes that run through that. But this was one we had great feedback, because the client had young children, very similar plan to the previous one, but they had young children, and from the kitchen and dining space, but they couldn't let the kids out to play in the garden while they made the dinner, because the back door would slam shut. It was an old rickety door. So when the kids couldn't see the mum and dad, and mum and dad couldn't see the kids, there was this unease. And you know, it was just a simple thing, but when you have kids in a family, you will realise how important that is. So that actually became a really big factor in the plan and the proposals in this project. So this is the rear of the project again, similar age to the previous property. The existing kitchen was in this, behind this window here. There was a little toilet here. And that was the back door into the garden. It slammed shut every time. We couldn't see the kids. This was the dining space. This is the proposed planning alterations of one property existing, but it's fine for this. So what we did was we created the kitchen that was previously the dining space, put a kitchen in there, opened up to the dining space so they could see each other, and then created a garden room at the back. And the idea was that from each of these spaces, they could see each other internally, but also see out into the garden.
And again, I think it's probably worth saying there was a similar theme through into the one. Yeah.
That door was previously over, so now when you come in the front door, you can see right through. right through to the garden.
It's probably also worth saying that they interviewed quite a few architects, and all the other architects that they interviewed talked about how they would add space onto their existing building. And we walked in and said, we don't think you necessarily need to do that. You could get away without doing this, and that allows the money to flow into the areas that it makes the biggest difference, because building is expensive. And the cheapest space that you have is almost always that you already own.
And again, that's the section there, and again, that garden at the end, we did a similar thing at that steel. We took the roof up, took the ceiling away, and opened up and created that volume. So yeah, I don't often put up pictures of toilets, but on the left-hand side is the little WC, and just to the next to that is the back door into the garden, and then that was the kitchen space on the right-hand side. So behind that WC is a window, and that's that window there. So by stripping that out, opening up that gable, we were able to create that visual connection from the dining space into the garden, so the kids can run in and out there and play as they like. So that was the previous kitchen, and then that window on the left-hand side is the same window. So again, it was all about opening that, and that's just a nice, garden space now. And that's the client's grandparents' furniture. And this again, it's all about them taking ownership and identity, and it's their house. It's ultimately their house. They live in it, and supporting that your clients can take ownership properly.
You'll notice the theme of the exposed roof structure reappearing here.
Yeah, so that again, before and after images. So that the top left-hand image is the dining room. That was the playroom. And that's the window, so we dropped the sill, created a new door at the back garden, knocked down the wall on the right hand side, and that's the new kitchen. That's it in construction. So obviously, we never left it like that. Then, the old dining space and the new dining space. So similar themes, visual connections, and really, as Matt said, with action, taking away things in order to create new connections.
Another thing that you can see a little bit on the left-hand side of this image, but it also exists on the right with the fitted furniture, is getting the space to work as hard as possible without adding to it. So that means that where there's an opportunity to get space to put clutter, like bookcases within the depth of a reveal or a fitted bench seats to allow your...
This is all, and behind here there's an old recess, so that's all hidden storage, and behind that wall as well. So just... yeah, and behind those panels.
They open up, they're all flush.
And that was the former dining room, kids' room, the window, so that's in the kitchen space.
It's really difficult sometimes to describe these without the before and after, but it's we think pretty dramatic, the transformation that can be made without adding any area to these. Hopefully that comes across. So the next section that we wanted to talk about was adaptation, and when you do need to add space. And we have two projects in slightly different contexts. One which just never ceases to amaze me how popular it is, because it's really little, and we'll talk about it. So it's this project, Stronach Glenbanker, which is up in Newtonmore. So this is the town of Newtonmore. If any of you know the timber supplier Russwood, they're based here. And this was a little crofter's cottage that sat on the hill. So this is the cottage when we initially came to see it. It was an absolute riot. As with an awful lot of the buildings in the Cairngorms, it's very much like building of necessity. There's no airs or graces about it. The space that they built was just about what they could afford. The width of the plan is driven by how long a piece of timber you can make to span between two stone walls. So that dictates how wide this cottage was. And you can see that it's had some additions to it over its years. It's got this rear projecting dormer on the right-hand side image, and this sort of porch at the front, and these two dormers. So the thing that was incredible about it was the views out from it. So that view at the top there is what you would see from the front of the cottage, where they had built the porch right in front of where you would want to look, in fact. The bottom left was the view to a silver car, and the bottom right is the view out of the gables. So there were mountains all around this, and this little cottage barely connected with them at all. So the existing plan, you can see it was 2 rooms and barely a kitchen and barely a staircase to go up to 2 rooms upstairs. And we had from the clients quite a significant brief. They wanted a 3-bedroomed house. They wanted a study. They wanted it to be light and open and connected with the landscape. They wanted a snug, and it was completely at odds with the cottage, which was small and modular and humble. And so that's quite a challenge. But what we always do is we'll look at a site analysis at the start. Where are the views? Where are the opportunities to extend? We should also say this is in the Cairngorms National Park, which actually has quite strict planning policy as well. So that was the challenge on this one. So this is how the cottage looked on the inside. The upstairs, for all it had windows, it was tiny. So if I stand up for a second, you can see Iain upstairs. So you can see how small that space is.
Side of architecture.
Yeah.
Driving up to the middle of nowhere to start measuring.
Yeah. Where there's no food and no running water, no nothing. Yeah. So in fact, the clients and the builder are sitting in that photo. The guy in the blue t-shirt is Tony the builder, and the chap sitting closest on the left-hand side is Iain, the client. So this was them celebrating completing on the cottage. We will always produce a few options, because what's right for one set of clients is not necessarily right for others. And it was a thing that I remember somebody saying to me when I was at university, Sarah Wigglesworth. It's really easy when you're designing things to get quite het up that you don't know what the right answer is in any given circumstance. But what she would say is, if in the very unrealistic opportunity that you had the same project in the same site with the same clients, the idea that you would come up with the same answer twice is utterly horrific. So once you understand that that's the case, you know that you could do a different project on that site and it could end up just as good. And so all you need to do is make a decision and run with it, and then make that decision as good as you possibly can. And that frees you up a little bit from thinking that at any moment in time when you're designing, you're dealing with triumph or disaster. You're not. It's all shades of grey. And what you want to do is you want to make a decision, and you want to make the best of that decision. So we tend to show a few options, and we will help the clients say, well, we think that this is in them to lead us through. And so these were a couple of the aborted options that we drew. But this was the original principle that we came up with. So there was an existing footprint. And one of the things that we were dealing with here was a lot of planning constraints. So what the clients were asking for was more area than planning policy allows. Planning policy says you're not allowed to extend by more than the original footprint. Well, the clients were asking for more than that. So we had to work out a way to do that. And what we said was, well, what if we extend by the original footprint next to the road, and then we hide an extra bit behind it? And what we then did was we chamfered the plan so that you got views out from all of the rooms without adding yet more area, which is just more cost as well to construct. And that allowed us to make a really efficient plan where all of the rooms, the master bedrooms, the guest bedrooms, were connected to all of those mountains around. And so this is the plan as was proposed. So you can see the original cottage with the thick walls, which housed a kitchen and a small staircase up just behind it. Then there was a snug, and from the kitchen you had a dining space, and then into the new extension was a living room just here with a wood burning stove that opened both ways. And then the extension behind was the front door, which is just up there between the new and the old, and a utility room and 2 bedrooms with a bathroom and an ensuite. And we really we like working with lots of different materials. I think that comes across quite consistently in our work, that we're but we really liked the textures of the cairngorms, and so we were trying to find things that were complementary to that and that had a lightness. So we did these sort of material example drawings where it is just about textures layered on top of one another. And this was one of the ways that we tried to persuade our clients that the thing to do was to put copper gutters on this building, which took a bit of persuasion. This was what we showed to the planners to describe to them those two extensions, with this one really hidden from public view. You can't see the living room extension at all. But this big strip dormer was also contrary to planning policy, and we showed them this as a means to try and get them to understand how it would connect to the mountains, and that you would walk up the stairs and be greeted with this ribbon window of a view out over the mountains. And this is it upon completion. And again, this is the render from the roadside, so where you can see it, that invisible other extension at the other end of the cottage, the original cottage. And this is it. Not, you can see it was taken when it was not quite complete, but you can see that yeah, it's turned out pretty much as it was proposed at planning stage. And you can see the slot window. So behind that, there's a bed that looks at it. And we really liked the idea of waking up in the morning and having this framed view out of the mountains beyond. So a few photos of the making. As ever, when you deal with existing buildings, you find quite a lot that you're not expecting. And one of the things was that all of the sarking boards in this. So the sarking is this stuff on the roof. This is a traditional way of making a roof in Scotland. It was all completely rotten, and it all had to be completely replaced as it was getting wrapped up with insulation. And then this is it once it was complete. The black cladding is thermally modified, and it came from a close dialogue with Rustwood, the timber supplier, who are about a mile down the road. So they're really proud of this project, and they talk about it quite a lot as an example, which makes us think that we did a good job in specifying them, which is always nice. And you can see the textures of the granite and the colour of the surrounding fields in these two. That's a really good one, actually, in terms of the colour of the guttering having a relationship to the surrounding landscape. So, as I said at the start, one of the client's requests was that it was bright and airy. We ended up taking away a bit of the first floor to allow us to do this so that it felt open in spite of the size of the cottage. And it really does feel beautiful and engaged with that landscape now. We dropped the sills of those windows down to the ground, so you do get these sort of portrait views out of the hillsides all the way through the property, and you can see obliquely up through to the dormer window in that image on the left. It's really hard to photograph this and make you understand. So that's the roof of the cottage that you can just about see there in the right-hand image, and this is the view out of the dormer window on the left. It is an unbelievable piece of scenery, and I think the cottage engages with it reasonably well now in a way that it didn't before. So this was a kind of a reasonably early project for the office. I think the clients engaged us on faith because we had barely finished anything at this point, but we both turned up and were bowled over by the scenery. And I think that encouraged the clients that we would try hard. The fact that we were so effusive about what they had bought. And from this came another project, which we'll talk about next. That was the cottage upon completion. So the next one is a very, very different context. But the clients went up to Newton Moor and saw this cottage and went, that was all right. We'll get them to do our house in Lenzie, which is suburban Glasgow. And they had bought a big villa in the conservation area. It wasn't a looker. It had been previously subdivided into 2 flats, and incredibly badly, I think it's fair to say. There was so much water ingress. The original staircase had been taken away. All the original windows had been taken away. The roof was in a state. It had a dormer window added that you can see in this bottom left image that had gone rotten, so the water was pouring down through the ceiling. It was not a beautiful property, but the bones of something good were there, and every project is as good as you make it. Now, the interesting thing about this project is that the client's a designer, and he met his wife at university doing architecture. So it was quite an interesting process being interviewed by somebody in that in those set of circumstances. And we went over there and met them, and I think it was quite a long chat that we had, wasn't it, about our attitude to design. And ultimately what the client knew was, because he designed cities in China, he might not be ideal to lead on a house extension in Lenzie, that there's a slightly different nature to those projects. So the original house had been added to his on the right describes the conservation area. So this property just here is the house. So it's within a conservation area in Eastern Bartonshire. The planners in Eastern Bartonshire can be some of the trickiest ones, I think it's fair to say. But what we established at an early stage was a framework with which we could collaborate with the clients on this. So it's not massively different to how we normally work in terms of showing them options. The difference was that we would get options back from our clients in this instance. So it became quite a hybrid working model. Again, our kind of a love of hand drawing at an early stage. We talked about this potential of making a house that engaged to create a courtyard. Janice, the client, was very green-fingered, and we knew that she wanted to grow. And historically in the west coast of Scotland, you get obviously walled gardens as a way of modifying the climate to allow you to grow things in a slightly more stable environment. And we really, as Iain's already said, a lot of Victorian properties, for all they're beautiful and with big rooms, they don't really engage with the outside. So what Gordon and Janice wanted to do was to add some area to this that actually allowed the property to engage with the outside. So these early sketches explored the idea of creating some additions that started to describe a usable external space. And again, it's another early sketch that sort of describes the courtyard. You can see the original house behind. One of the other things that you'll bump into a lot throughout your career is the nature of economics, and the fact that buying a property in Lenzie and spending an awful lot of money on it and then selling it, it probably doesn't make any sort of economic sense. Well, one of the ways that the clients in this instance got around that, or we worked with them to get around it, was what happens if we plan for it to become subdivided again in the future? And what that means is that they could have 2 properties that they sell, and that therefore allows the sort of the reins off the economic justification for doing things a bit more now, by knowing that there's potentially more money to come down the line. So what we came up with was the solution that's in the top right corner there, which is this could be divided into 2 houses. One is a 4-bedroomed house based around a courtyard, and one is a 4-bedroomed house, broadly speaking, within the envelope of the original building. So what that meant was that you would need to convert what is the garage, which is at the top of the proposal. And there were a few bits and pieces technically that we needed to do to make that work, to allow it to be plugged into the original house. So again, the original render and of the courtyard. And this is the house as it was completed. This caught the tail end of the pandemic, so it had a very fuzzy line getting over the finish line. The clients were in by the time COVID started, but it wasn't finished externally for a wee while after that because no work was happening. So you can see the extension has this external area, all of the glazing peels back, and it does what the original house can't do, which is that it allows you to spill out from the kitchen, which is on the right-hand side of that image, and the living room, which is on the left-hand side, just to walk freely out to the garden. And they have a young family as well, and dogs, I should also say, that they're smitten with. And this is the courtyard. There's a pretty clear material language, we think, that's, well, understandable on this, that where we were making new interventions, we wanted them to be legible as new interventions. And when we were dealing with the old building, it was legible as the old building. So the top left image is within the original house. The right-hand image is within the extension. And you can see there's a lot of ornaments within the original house, and it's very stripped back in comparison within the extension. And as I said, the original staircases were taken out to subdivide this into flats. So we inserted 2 new staircases into this, which are again very legible and modern. And we worked with a fantastic maker to make these handrails. This is the pottery studio that Janice had. This is really inexpensive architecture. This is painted engineering grade timber and exposed structure, and there's nothing particularly expensive about any of this. It is not an expensive way of making work, but actually adding that texture and that soul really helps to animate the space, we think. And it's probably one of my favorite rooms in this project. And here are the new staircases. So we wanted these to be legible as objects within that original building. Right. We're good. We're good. In the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. We were phoned up by a former client of ours who worked at Historic Environment Scotland, who asked if we'd be interested in restoring an A-listed fire damaged house. We immediately assumed that it was going to be an A-listed Victorian or Edwardian pile somewhere, because there's lots of those in Scotland, somewhere in Pollokshields or the West End of Glasgow or something, or Edinburgh. Now, I think like most architects, this property was sold in 2018, and we had seen it when it was on the market and had lusted after it. It's designed by an architect called Peter Womersley, and it was designed for a textile designer called Bernard Klein, who worked down in the Scottish borders, just outside Selkirk. So it was designed in 1957, and we obviously said, yes, we'd love to do that. Whereabouts is it? And I then got very confused when our former client Ranald said, "Oh, do you know the house by Peter Womersley for Bernard Klein?" And I was like, "Yes, of course I do. But why are you talking about that? We were talking about an A-listed house." He said, "Well, that house has had a fire." So these are original photographs of it upon completion. So these photos date from the 1960s, probably late 50s, early 60s. Peter Womersley was a modernist, loved Mies van der Rohe, laid everything out very rigorously, liked to try and get rid of any ornament and decoration. So didn't like radiators or light fittings or switches, sockets, doors. He would try and hide all of that. And this is what we saw when we arrived. So the new owners of the house, when they bought it, had set a fire going in the half that you can see just behind the buckets. And Bernard Klein clearly didn't have fires very often because there was a crack in the brickwork, which allowed embers to get through into the roof void, which, as you can see, was a timber finish, and it ignited. Now, the clients, obviously the fire department were then called and they dumped water onto it. That meant there was a hole in the roof, which meant that rain came through it. The smoke damaged a lot of the woodwork. The soot damaged a lot of the woodwork. The water ruined the floor. So it was in a bit of a state, as you can start to see in some of these photos. The floor in particular, so there's a sunken section in the middle of the plan, which was the sitting area. And that had, because it was like a swimming pool, the fire department had poured water on to extinguish the fire, and it had filled up, but it had this very beautiful floor in it, which all of the wood tried to expand and it didn't have anywhere to go. So it all rose up and was very badly cupped. But you can see in these, it's surrounded by beautiful trees and beautiful, beautiful setting. Again, you can see in that top right image, the floor is no longer flat. It has this sort of scalloped profile. And the bottom left image, again, you can see where there isn't the sunken area, it uses a stone called travertine, which is what this is, this stuff here. And it was really badly damaged by the soot that had come from the fire. And the bottom right image is a photograph of the ceiling panels. So this is one of 2 category A listed modernist houses in Scotland. So that tells you how rare it is as a property. And again, I think it's worth recognizing Iain King at this point. Iain was the project architect on the Glasgow School of Art restoration. So he has this slightly dubious expertise in the restoration of category A listed fire damaged buildings. It's probably not something that you want to be doing too much of, but he was the project architect on this. So this is the plan of the house. I should just describe this a little bit. Just up here is the front door. So this is a park carport. You walk in. This is the sunken area that's the living room. There's a dining space and a kitchen. This is the master bedroom. This is the living space. This is sort of a library console area, and this is a seat. And then this is a bathroom and a dressing room. And up here is a series of bedrooms and a day room. So you can see it's a sort of an S in its accommodation, like this. And the elevations, super modernist slab of a building. So this is the roof plan, and we kind of highlighted in red everything that we touched. So you can see it's probably about 60% of the building was affected by the fire. One of the things that we discovered through the course of the project was that the roof had been replaced 5 times already. So it had some issues. And that was in very large part down to the fact that it wasn't particularly well insulated, and that it was a flat bitumen roof, which had been damaged by the sun. So when bitumen gets the sunshine on it, it cracks, and that allows water in. So in the 60 years that the building had been around for, it had already had 5 roofs. So that's a new roof every 12 years. That's not that great going, really. And so out of this fire that happened, our clients gave us this wonderful brief, which was, how do we take this building off grid? How do we make it use less energy than it did before? Is there an opportunity to put in a heat pump? Is there an opportunity to put in underfloor heating, to put in low energy wiring, to insulate the roof that we otherwise wouldn't have had if the fire hadn't happened? And that was what we were tasked to do. So to put back the building as it was before and put in all of this stuff and make it completely invisible. So like we were never there. An awful lot of our projects, I would say, are really obsessed with the detail. And this is a case in point. We went into a huge amount of effort to try and find the original details of how the house was originally designed, what the key themes that ran through Peter Womersley's work were in terms of how he would put his buildings together, and how we could affect it without being invisible. So these two, leading edge of the roof. So the one at the top is the original one, so you can see it had a ballasted roof effectively, and then it had a kind of a solid fill of insulation, which is actually not great in terms of condensation. And what we proposed was that we could get a thick slab of insulation up above, and you can see it would have a continuous jacket around it that we could hide by doing that. And by stepping the thick slab of ventilation back from the leading edge of the roof a little bit. So we could turn it into a proper warm roof that wasn't going to have any condensation issues, and that maintained the profile of the roof when it was completed. We do probably, I think there were something like 85 drawings that we produced for this project. So to give you an idea, there's a lot of drawing information that goes into just putting a building back the way it was.
That issue there Matt's talking about in terms of insulation is actually a recurring theme throughout modernist buildings now. And it's one that David Chipperfield spoke about in terms of the East London Rose Gallery in Berlin. They are very different, not as great. But it's how do you actually insulate that without it changing proportion and changing detail? So it takes a bit of thinking to get around it.
Yeah.
And this is it. No.
So some photos from the outside. I think what comes across from this is that the way that roof profile was adjusted is invisible. You can't see it from the outside. And this is it after it was put back together on the inside as well. So that ceiling, which it's just the most beautiful room to walk into. About 60% of that ceiling is new. We had to try and keep as much of it as possible. And that then means that you're trying to match the new ceiling into the old ceiling. What we discovered was that the timber that was used was an endangered African hardwood originally. So the question is, do you find something that looks like the endangered African hardwoods and try and match it, or do you use an endangered African hardwood knowing that that's a bad thing to do?
It's not answered to it.
So anyway, the main contractor that we chose for this, it actually wasn't tendered as a job because we decided that it was too risky. And there probably weren't that many people that would be good enough at the joinery and the cabinetry. So we found a cabinet maker who also did main contracting and negotiated with them to get to a point at which it had viability with the loss adjusters from the insurance company. And they were responsible for refinishing the walnut paneling at the ends that you can just see on the right-hand side of the fireplace there, and rebuilding all of the bookcases and the console. All of this stuff was taken away and refinished. And we had to do a very forensic series of paint scrapes to try and work out what the original lacquer that they had used on that wood was, to try and make sure that we weren't affecting it too much. And all of this, I should say, is done in discussion with Historic Environment Scotland, so that they're part of the process, so that we're not going off and doing our own thing, really. I think one of the things that comes across when you see photographs like this is quite how inspired by the landscape the architecture is. The textures that you see in the surrounding landscape are one and the same with the textures of the building. It's really embedded in its site. And one of the great things that we discovered through the process of this is how to make a hidden door like this one that you see in the left-hand image. So I suspect they're going to be appearing in a few of our projects going forward. Okay.
Yeah, up until the supposed projects we've shown have been, adaptations or alterations, transformations to existing buildings, but obviously how do you approach, probably you're working in new buildings and blank sites, how do you approach new projects? So one of the new projects that we're working on just now is an outdoor learning hub for Harmony Education Trust. So that's an education trust in Ballerno, and specialises in education for kids that have been through the foster care system and then for one reason or another don't settle with families to go and live at the school. And the outdoor learning hub has a response. It's really it's a node almost, because they do a lot of outdoor activities. So they'll get kids ready for whitewater rafting or outdoor climbing, etc. So there's a bit of that to it, and there's also teaching spaces. So this is the site of the project as we are delivering it. So it's a heavily wooded site, and it's within the grounds of who's the architect of that?
The original building, Lorimer. Yeah. So there's a Lorimer
school building there, and there's also Richard Murphy building on the site as well. Do you want the next thing? So the existing buildings, the one at the top, and then Richard Murphy has a building at the back of that. This is their existing outdoor centre, bedline boundary planning door. So, and then this site, which isn't in that plan, is dominated by trees.
We should also say this is another project which is in the curtilage of not one but two listed buildings. So that's a listed building, that's a listed building, and we're trying to build in the middle of it next to a whole load of mature trees that weren't allowed to come away. So lots of constraints.
Yeah, the top left image is the existing outdoor centre that we have. The top right is the existing Lorimer building, and then below that sits behind the Lorimer building is the Richard Murphy teaching spaces that were built in 2005. So we had to submit, it was a competition, it was an open competition, there was 80 practices that went through. It went down to 6. We made the interview and then we won it on the interview. And through the brief, when you get a brief, you're always trying to be technical thing, but what came across in the client's brief was the emotion and how important this building is for the kids. And we really felt it was important to, well, we came up with these 3 words that framed the project. So that was embrace, was basically how we understand the school, how we understand how the kids are taught that, so how you're embracing and working with the client. Engage, how the building will engage with the landscape and the surroundings. And then create is obviously the proposal. That proposal comes from the kids, the client, the site, and then there's a proposal. So that was a really clear message that we delivered to the client, I think, from the outset, and I think they enjoyed that clarity. And then, just some sketches there to give an idea. If you jump on in it, we did some sketches about how they're very clear in the activities that were to get into the building. So we started to look at how they might be arranged in a wooded area. It's not a plan, but it's an idea at the moment. And then the next image. And we produced this, and it's really a kind of activity collage. It's not a building by any manner of means, but it was really how we were exploring how the spaces might connect to each other and where activities take place and how they might wrap around the building. So it's a difficult balance to show an image like that without a client getting a building in their head and you not designing a building, because they didn't want us to design a building at that stage. They just wanted us to say how we would approach it, what were the key things. Because if you go in and design a building without even speaking to the client, what's the point? The client makes the building ultimately. So that was really the formation of the bid. I feel like to try and win the job.
There's a Chinese proverb that I think we've talked about quite a lot in the office, which is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. Well, this site had so many mature trees, it felt like we had to thread the needle. Like it was so rich for that reason that we had to find a way to build without affecting any of the trees. And that was the idea that acted as this catalyst. was how do we engage this building with this amazing landscape that it has around it as lightly as possible.
So there's a series of diagrams, site analysis diagrams in terms of proposals. Won't linger on them too much, but the top left is the clearing. So there's an actual clearing between the existing outdoor centre and trees that were no longer able to retain in terms of how the teaching spaces would connect with the building. So this block here, for instance, that's teaching spaces which connect to the existing school buildings, and this block deals with the outdoor activities getting changed because there's a car park here and a road access. So looking at how strategically we arrange that, but also respond to the natural clearing. And then on the left-hand side, so we've got a large open space here, intimate outdoor spaces in this side, and then the outdoor space with the richer office there. So look at those connections and how we wrap the building in between those trees. So that's a roof plan of where the building sits in the site amongst the trees. The plan probably doesn't tell the story because you see the shape of it at the moment, and those trees it hides in behind. If you've got the next one.
It does show how close the trees are to the building, though, that are being, like, I think we're taking away 1 or 2 trees to get this to work, and they're weeds, the ones, all of the category A trees have affected the shape of this building.
And I think it's working super hard. There's a lot of spaces in it, there's a lot of activities in it.
See, we should say this, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 at the top teaching spaces in this block, and then you can see there's some ancillary accommodation here. So all of this will spill out. So this is like the 5th classroom with the trees acting as a bookend to the outdoor space. So there's a glade that the building has created. And then this is staff accommodation. So as people come in, as Iain says down here, all those diagrams of that you do at university, they're completely relevant, right, to how people arrive. And so this is the arrival point of the building for the teachers. And then this is the stuff for the outdoor activities. This is a big changing area, changing block here. And then this is a kind of a reception area that has a relationship back to the original building. So the point is from here that you can see the original building. And you can see that just those simple diagrams that you do with thick pens are directly relevant, and it finds its way through into the architecture.
Go through if we get to the 3D image, but it's a curious thing to design a building that actually you don't want people to notice in many ways. It's not about the building. There's already a Loader building there, there's a Murphy building there, and where we are is in amongst these trees, and we didn't want to create something that would intimidate the kids either, because there's one, you've been through enough, and then turn up somewhere that can be really quite intimidating and be invisible in amongst these trees, and really just focus on that setting. So you can see there the scale. It's funny when we get the 3D images that they've done. We need to get, the images came back, and it was like the trees were cut to there. So no, we need the trees, we need the scale, because that's the site. So you can see how it sits, and then that's the existing Loader building set, right? And then that idea of the internal courtyard that Matt talked about, how that spills out and engages into that woodland, because that's the character of the site. That's the beauty of the site, is that woodland. So being able to create those outdoor spaces, and then look at some internal images of the nature of the internal spaces.
We didn't want these, and I think the clients were really keen, but we designed realistic spaces that could have a patina and that could be messy and used as classrooms are. We're not designing a museum, we're designing a building to be used and loved and to have stuff stuck to the walls, and that was a really important part of this.
Yeah, and then the big workshops. So there's so many activities going on in the space.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to this one's going on site.
A few months' time.
Yeah. And hopefully you won't ever see it. Yeah. And then the final project we'd like to know, okay, because it's 5:06. Jim. So yeah, Kendall House.
We should say no one else has seen these photographs, so you're privileged
You
in
and
this.
all of the internet.
Yeah.
Privileged to see this. So this was our not first, but probably second private house, certainly the largest project that we've built so far.
Yeah.
And this is a sketch by Matt, an early sketch we spoke earlier on about.
Is that mine?
Sketches.
Did I do that?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. See, we forget until you look back. It's actually quite nice. So yeah, there's a nice quote by the client up there in terms of they had a farm site and they'd been in Loader, the client's family, for generations, and there was existing farm buildings on it, but they were dilapidated. And again, one of these sites that we end up in the middle of nowhere looking at a building that's falling to bits.
Thinking, what have we done?
What have we done? We're going to do last time. So yeah, so it's in East Kilbride and just near Glasgow, if you know, Central Belt, and yeah, that's the farm. At the moment, it's fairly remote. Just go on to the next slide. And this was the clients. They lived in this house, and this was the grouping of farm buildings here that we were tasked with. Well, the client demolished them and made way for the new house.
That's the original grouping of buildings. So this red barn, just use it as a frame of reference
That's
for what's to
still
come. That's still there, but all of this stuff in here isn't there anymore. So yeah, there's stuff now. This top right image, if you look carefully at the gable, you'll notice that the gable is coming out past the roof.
That's not a good sign.
That's something to walk a long way around, because it did fall down about 2 weeks after that photograph was taken. So it's incredibly exposed out in the landscape here. That's one thing to say. It's very, very windy. And at the moment, I imagine there's about 1.5 feet of snow, actually. Yeah. So this is greenbelt land, which means that there's a presumption against development. That's the challenge that was on this project. What we started to look at, because so as James has said, Iain said, James and Lorna wanted a house in the middle of a working, there are tractors moving all the way around it. And what we started to do to establish the principle of building a house in this location to the planners was we started looking at all of the groupings of buildings that existed in the South Lanarkshire landscape. And what you can see here is that you get this connection of kind of 1.5 story buildings where you get little pockets of courtyards like these. You can see them kind of consistently around here, where buildings are kind of grouped to make a sense of enclosure and to give a measure of protection from the weather. Go on, mate.
Red cloud. So that'll make sense. The kind of character analysis and looking at the buildings, and that barn in the middle image is just the red barn that sits next to it. But you see, rural buildings, farming buildings, they tend to have a strong geometry and really functional detailing in many ways, and often that's added on just as unnecessary. And we took a lot of reference from that to present the case. Yeah, and just the datum tends to be a datum, how it's ground, etc. So there's a lot of references that we took from the buildings around about. And again, as Matt says, in sensitive sites, it's important that you build your case for your proposals. So whilst we were doing something that was new, we were taking reference from what was there.
So this is iron oxide, which is it's a bit like galvanizing. It's a cheap way of putting a finish onto a cheap material like corrugated iron that gives it a measure of protection from the weather. As I've said, it was in the middle of a working farm. So one of the things that we established at the outset was, well, how do we start to form an enclosure and a house that looks into an enclosure and feels like part of the landscape, but which allows the farm life to go on around it. And so one of the early conversations that we had with James and Lorna was, well, look, if we have a house that opens into the courtyards freely, but then it picks its views out into the landscape beyond much more judiciously driving past. And if you're in your dressing gown getting a cup of tea in the morning, they're not necessarily going to see you unless you're okay with that, you know. So it was that sort of a discussion that we had, you know. It's how do you arrange this so that it feels okay?
So yeah, plan.
The plan as proposed. So this is the front door, just here. You move through a series of ancillary spaces. Again, a lot of our projects have a kind of a private sleeping wing and a public living wing.
Yeah.
You should talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I suppose earlier on I was talking about, you know, sequence of experiences in space, and one point to pick out is that space there is really important in the lobby of the boot room. In any rural building where you're coming from a wide open landscape, the first thing is you come in, you know, in this case, you come in this kind of chamber that lets you, you know, take off your boots and your coat and get in from the elements. And that in itself is a room to us, to mine. And from there, it was really about that holding you and then moving through the sequence of spaces. It looks quite open plan, but there's actually, you see in the photographs, there's a series of partitions that kind of come up, but the roof pops up and over the top, so what was it? And this is a karate studio. That was the brief. It's now a child's playroom, cinema, everything else. The kids, it's soundproof, that's everything now. So it's always interesting how the brief can develop and kids dictate how they're going to use the space. Okay. Yeah. So the section and then you know, so it's the doorway. You know, the key thing is the profile of those roofs, and that was really taken from the existing buildings on the site and around predominant, and also creating sequence of volumes. You know, you arrive in at the lobby space and then you move into the next door, you know, next space it's larger, and then we move into the living space at the end. And we've actually got a guest bedroom at the top of the largest pitch there, above the living room space, and a reading room on the corner where that stairs. Yeah. So this is it as built, and these photographs are pretty recent. Not today, that would be quick, but yeah, there was more snow in there. So in terms of materiality, the stone, all the stone on the building is reclaimed from the buildings that were taken down. And internally, there is a large area, the lobby space, the living space, kitchen, is all, the brick floor is all the bricks from the existing buildings that were taken down as well. So the client was super committed. He cleaned over 3,500 bricks for reuse. And you see them in our works. So yeah, that's the main end of the front doors and behind the colonnade there. And you can just see those 3 pitches kicking up. The landscape, the clients get plans to carry out a full landscaping project just as once they settle into the house and get used to the environment. So this was the boot room that I mentioned. And I think we kind of like to control those experiences, those spaces, you know, so when you move into a space, you're very contained. But then once it opens up, you then get that long view, you get the light in from the courtyard, and you get that view that connects right out. So we try to avoid any dead ends in terms of circulation as well.
This is
it's optional. You know, I think at some points there's a bedroom door at one end, but again, it's up to the client if they want to do that. But the idea is that you brought into this intimate space from the wide rural landscape, and then you move on.
This is the reclaimed brick floor that you can see in here as well.
Yeah, so there's loads of different bricks, and we use these kind of more utilitarian bricks in the boot room, and then you see beyond the went for a herringbone. The pitched roofs. This is, you know, so whilst it's open plan, the client still wanted to be in control of the internal spaces and still have separation from the kitchen, you know, because it's practical things if you're making dinner and you've got guests and you don't want to see what's going on, etc. So the volume kicks up, you know, for the top, still gives that openness, but you know, lets them control that privacy. And then, you know, sliding doors, really letting spaces expand and contract as the client wants. And this space they use as a reading room. but it also works with the guest room above, because they have a family, elderly family coming stay over, they get that room above, and when they slide the doors, they get that space as well. But over an evening, you know, they'll read to the kids, they're just off the living room space.
You can see the themes of kind of fitted furniture, bookcases recessed into walls, recurring here, and as well having the structure on show in the roof. That's just, well, it was Douglas fir with plywood above it that then just gets lined. So it wasn't, again, expensive materials particularly that we used to make this, but that we then applied a finish to it. So there's an honesty to that that I think we quite like as a practice. And again, those themes run through.
This was an essay. This was a quote, sorry, from an essay that I read after the event. But it was Lewis Cannon talks about the room, the street, and human experience. And in that, you know, he just speaks about the importance of the room on its own, and how you can change and manipulate that environment, how the spaces link together. It's a great essay. I think you should read it. It links to a scene in a film that I like in Goodfellas. I don't know if you've seen Goodfellas, where he takes his girlfriend to see a show. And there's a one shot that's all this experience. And that, to me, when I'm explaining to students, that to me is part of architecture. Is what is that experience and that journey that Louis can articulate. At the age of September 1971, have a read of that. It's fantastic. He talks about the stair and how the stair can be a moment to sit, have a read. It's more than just a vehicle for, you know, moving up and down. Yeah. And again, open up spaces, allowing them to expand and contract. So that was what I was talking about in terms of not having that dead end, being able to, you know, always see the landscape from wherever you are in the building. And then detail was just thinking about how the roof needs to go. You know, it doesn't always have to, you know, bump into it, but actually just, and yeah, it took us a while to resolve those junctions and lights, etc. But I think it makes a big difference when it doesn't quite, you know, you don't have plasterboard turning up everywhere and it's heavy and get the roof touching it lately. So, and again, that view of the landscape beyond. And then that's the actuality from that sketch. So that sketch at the beginning, so it's nice that it actually looks a bit like it. But yeah, and you can see that transparency, the views north and south across the site. Look at the views into their courtyard, or the longer views to the south. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's kind of us. I just want to say a very quick thanks, because it's like the single biggest people that we work with are our clients. We're at the stage now that we're in the next generation of projects, and people have seen the first lot and said, well, we want something like that. And that's a whole lot easier than the first generation of projects, where really we don't have anything to show other than we think something like this might be nice. And so, but we work with really talented engineers, builders, cabinet makers, project managers, suppliers, but it's the clients that really make our projects. All of them, no matter whether it's domestic or non-domestic. And so establishing that kind of human relationship with them, heavens knows it's been pretty hard for the last couple of years, but it seems to be coming back in 2022. So yeah, thanks guys. Thanks.